ready?
Yes.
Okay. I thank the government for presenting such a great case, but there are other alternatives that you have to look at. So we're going to first propose our independent points, and then we're going to go on to the issues at hand. So without further ado, the 3 points are: first, positive peace. The entire idea of the United Nations was to establish a positive peace. Once we looked at the failed ideas of the League of Nations, which was its predecessor, that countries can get together, have a top leadership, and then decide through this cooperation that's stable that we can forge our ideas and we can forge this idea of positive peace. And how we isolate positive peace and only we can solve for positive peace is because only a stable industry can create positive peace. Positive peace is the idea that we build infrastructure, we work together, and we have peacekeeping operations that go on for centuries and have the same leadership. So then when people look back at the United Nations, they're like, oh wow, you increased our country through growth, through our agriculture, and through human rights. And that's what the United Nations has been doing. They've been increasing human rights, they've been fixing things through agriculture, and they've even improved healthcare. But what they've only had you look at is the main issues and dealing with problems that have arisen, but not have focused on the solution. So the positive peace is impact that kind of critiques their idea that of everything based off of warfare, and we kind of reinvent the world by maintaining this status quo. And our second independent point is that shifting away from war-based thought leads to, or shifting towards a more war-based thought based off of their Gaza idea and the Rwanda leads us to asymmetric warfare, because if everyone is focusing in on how can we make war more efficient, how can we prevent these conflicts faster, and how can we militarize and base more power in certain situations, then we're going to create the idea of asymmetric warfare in which countries with more power are going against countries that they don't like as much. So they focused on the problems with Israel, and they said that we might not like Israel as much. So when these countries are rotating and they get their chance to point out and poke holes at the countries that they don't like. So if China's in power, they might be able to poke holes at Taiwan and say, oh, we don't believe Taiwan should be doing this. Or if South Korea's in charge, they might be like, oh, we don't like North Korea, so we should create all these problems and we should not allow them to do certain things. And they destroy the entire idea of what the United Nations is by having a stable country and building things. And the last issue that we want to bring up is bureaucracy. The main problem is that by having a rotating power, they're adding bureaucracy to a currently corrupt system. So if you add more complexity to something, it can only become worse. So even though they said there's current bureaucracy now, everything will be worse, and if anything, the system might collapse at its end. And now we're going to go to their issues. So on their number 1 point is that they haven't been doing anything. Well, they haven't proposed any solutions based off of their affirmative. Even if they are doing nothing now, they never proposed any logical, clear-cut reasoning on steps that a rotating power system will solve any of the problems. So you have two options you can look at. Either the problems are inevitable and things like genocide and problems in Gaza will never be resolved, or their solution will not provide an adequate attempt because they're not making a significant change in the system and they have no logical evidence to support this. And second, they say that they're fostering cooperation, but by having a rotating power, they're actually decreasing cooperation because one person has more power at a time, and the top powers don't have a stable trade relationship which they can talk to each other, and they all have to agree. That's why one person should be able to veto, because if they don't all agree on something, then it's not cooperative, it's individualistic. And the second issue they bring up is the conflicts will continue. But like I said on the first point, they don't address any of the fundamental logical issues. And second, they bring up the impact of Rwanda, but Rwanda is something that happened in the past, so you can't change the past, so they have no future problems that they solve for. And I'm going to talk about that more on the impact level at the end. And they said, they talked about Gaza and how the UN is not doing anything, but the reason why the UN is not doing anything has nothing to do with the UN's purpose. The UN's purpose is the positive peace that it establishes now. By making their idea of a rotating system and trying to attempt it, they're actually creating more problems by interfering with Gaza and by focusing more on the militaristic issues and not the building of infrastructure for future problems that we're going to solve. So the last portion they talked about was the UN Security Council is very bureaucratic, and as you can see, they really only increase this problem by making it a more bureaucratic system. And now I want to spend some time to talk about the impact level of this debate. So as an overall whole, the only things by changing the organization of the UN that they're doing is actually just adding bureaucracy and changing the current system, but they're not making fundamental reorganizations or anything like that. So if you want to look at a counter plan by the negative, our best alternative would be to create more accountability and have more structures to ensure that either people can figure out what other people are thinking and agree with each other, or they can have a stronger reorganization. So that would be our counter case if the affirmative wants to look at it. But now the main impacts. First, the impacts they present are that new problems will keep being created, but they don't actually solve for those problems, so they don't have access to those. But we're going to look at our impacts. The first is the positive piece. By having a stable organization where people don't rotate and everyone has to agree, we establish the idea of positive peace. We focus on infrastructure. And you don't want to look at this on a level of just policy making. You want to look at this on a level of rhetoric. Everything that they say is talking about militaristic ideas and talking about problems that could possibly arise. So the rhetoric they're using also links them into the problem of positive peace. So even if they can prove a way how they can solve for problems, you want to look at how this round is impacted on the entire community as a whole. Only the things that we say will actually change the world. So the things that we're saying, the positive piece that we're focusing on, will have real world impacts. But by them just talking about the policy changing impacts, they can't actually do that in the real world. So our positive peace impacts are going to impact the other people in the room that are listening to our conversation. So that's going to be something you always look at first. And the second thing that you want to look at on their own policy-making level is we're the only ones that have significant impacts will happen from the affirmative's actions, like the asymmetric warfare that we brought up by focusing on new countries and having power under one person, the increased bureaucracy, which could cause it to fail, and that they're losing the focus on positive peace. And that's it.